And it looks like we are live. Give me a minute, guys, if I can make my computer work the right way. I got to get our Facebook groups in here, as you know we want to do here on a wonderful Friday evening. Get everybody together here to join us for Dove Valley Deep Divers and talk some Denver Broncos football. Still waiting on one more. Mile high, hello everybody in Broncos country. Welcome into another episode of the Dove Valley Deep Divers podcast. I am your host, Lance Sanderson, and joining me as per usual is my good friend and colleague. He is Mile High Huddle's senior NFL draft analyst, the one and only Erick Trickel. And dude, it has been a very newsworthy week here in Broncos country, obviously with the Russell Wilson pending release. Technically, they have said that he is going to be released. He's out there gallivanting around, going through a bunch of different team meetings, met with the Giants earlier today, the Steelers as well. The Raiders seem to be interested. What's going on, my friend? How you doing?
Doing good. It's been a busy week. I mean, with not only all the releases and restructures and all that are going on, and the one re-signing that has happened with the Broncos, it's been, we've kicked off the Finding Broncos scouting reports. Already got a couple of those up and published, have a few more waiting in the publisher to be going out. So we really kicked that off. Had to, update everything from the combine, getting ready for free agency and trying to keep an eye on what's all going on there, because all that stuff plays its part in the scouting reports. I mean, with one of the things that we're going to talk about is the tight end release today, Chris Manhertz. Mm-hmm. And that happened while I was writing up a scouting report on two tight ends, which obviously changes the need that the Broncos have at the position a little bit.
Yes, it does.
Which adjusts some things that I'm saying that I talk about in the article. So it's been a very busy week for me on my end. And I'm excited that the high time, that exciting period of free agency or the offseason with free agency is about to get underway.
Yeah, man. This part of the year is always the most fascinating to me. This is where we may not be building the Broncos in terms of what Nick and Carl do over there on Tuesday evenings, but here on Dove Valley Deep Divers, we like to go deep in every single angle, and it makes it so difficult to kind of navigate through what we've got going up with content in terms of the Finding Broncos series, which is getting underway here soon, but also free agency right around the corner. We've got the legal tampering period coming up here on Monday afternoon, a couple of days before the opening of the official start of the NFL offseason in terms of unrestricted free agency. And man, like you said, it is so difficult because everything changes at the drop of a hat. Obviously, we had multiple different moves. The Russell Wilson news is definitely something we're going to dive into here in a minute. But the Broncos restructured Tim Patrick's deal here just a little while ago to keep him under contract for 2024 and potentially see how he's going to look. They also obviously moved on from Justin Simmons. Mike McGlinchey restructured his contract. They brought back Quinn Bailey. Chris Manhertz is what you were kind of alluding to. How does this affect your process, though? That's the big thing, because it definitely upsets mine.
It doesn't really affect my process when it comes to scouting, because obviously I'm still scouting the players. But as I mentioned, like when I'm typing up an article, like again with the tight ends, I was typing up Theo Johnson and Cade Stover. Mm-hmm. And in the middle of that, I click over to Twitter for a second and, Chris Manhertz was released. Well, there goes their blocking tight end. So while I starting the report going off about how they need more of that receiving threat, well, now they need a guy who can kind of fill both a little bit, because Adam Trotman is also a free agent. And they, at least Greg Dulcich, even though he can't stay on the field, at least he can be a little bit of a receiving threat. Lucas Kroll has some potential there. So it shifted focus from, all right, well, maybe this guy is a better fit to, well, no, this other guy's a little bit of a better fit. So it changes things like that, but it doesn't really change things with the process, with how I scout players or even how I grade players.
The grading of players is definitely something that is fun to go through. I guess not necessarily grading the players, but evaluating what they mean for the Broncos. That's the big thing. Obviously, what you kind of just touched on a little bit. They need that blocking tight end now. They need another player, because if you're going into this season with Greg Dulcich as the player that is like you're going to hang your hat on and rely upon this year, you're probably doing it the wrong way, because quite honestly, the guy can't stay healthy. He's got so many hamstring issues. like you said, Adam Troutman's on the way out this year as a free agent. Chris Manhurt's obviously there. Lucas Kroll showed a lot last year. I thought that he played pretty well in his opportunity there. But you're going into the room into the offseason right now with Dulcich and Kroll as the only two guys on the roster. So how does that change everything in terms of what the Broncos could be looking at in the NFL draft? I mean, they need a reliable guy, a guy that can stretch the seam a little bit, because that's what Sean Payton likes to do with his tight ends. You need a guy that can stand in line and block. So it just makes it so much more fun and so much more difficult to kind of navigate how this team is going to be built, especially over the next couple of weeks. But guys, before we get into it, great show, loaded show. Obviously, we're going to talk and break down a whole bunch of the news. We've got a bunch of people in the chat here. I'm going to grab David here in a second, but we're also going to run at the end of the show through a little bit of the combine notes that just got over on Sunday afternoon, updating Erick's top 100 big board, and just have a great Friday night here talking Denver Broncos football. Let's get to David here, $5 super chat, jumping in early as the show is just getting kicked off. With the Broncos now $18+ million under the cap, according to overthecap.com, do you see them releasing or trading more players in the days ahead? And Erick, there's one. There's actually two or three that are very big ones, but the biggest one that I want your thoughts on, especially after the news of Tim Patrick, Courtland Sutton, man, what is the latest news with him and his future with the Denver Broncos?
Well, from how I've understood it and talking with multiple people in and around the organization, is that they want Courtland Sutton back. Keeping Tim Patrick was, obviously a thing they wanted to do. They weren't sure if they're going to get that done because they're asking him to take a massive pay cut. But he didn't have a whole lot of ground to stand on after missing the last 2 seasons. So the change with Tim Patrick doesn't change a whole lot for Courtland Sutton from how I understand it. Obviously, things can change at a moment's notice.
Okay.
It still sounds like, Courtland Sutton, he's still under contract for the next 2 years. He's a free agent after the 2025 season. He's the type of receiver that you want no matter what your quarterback situation is. Sutton is a good enough receiver that you want him no matter what. So I just don't think that changes. He's unless somebody comes in offering a big deal for him to trade for him. I think he's back. Maybe a restructured contract a little bit, possibly an extension, though I doubt that. Jerry Jeudy, I fully expect to be on the way out. Garrett Bowles, it sounds like they're working hard to try to get him done on a restructured deal, if not an extension there as well. DJ Jones, it's been kind of back and forth with him from what I understand, due to the Broncos issues on their defensive line that they had last year, but his salary is a little bit too high. Trying to figure that out. And then, of course, they have multiple other restructure candidates as well. It wouldn't surprise me if in the coming days, early next week, we hear about Zach Allen and Ben Powers also getting restructures done on their deals.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you about Zach Allen. I knew that Ben Powers was definitely another one, but I'm glad that you brought both of those guys up in terms of restructure candidates. I want to go a little bit backwards, though, here, and let's talk about the leadership in the locker room, because obviously you're talking Russell Wilson released. You're talking Justin Simmons released. Those guys were very well respected in the locker room. You brought back Tim Patrick, who was another player that multiple times over the course of his tenure as the Denver Broncos wide receiver has been lauded for his leadership, specifically by Montrell Washington, who's now with the Kansas City Chiefs, at least last I remember. KJ Hamler, no longer with the team, but those guys really went out of their way to talk about his leadership. Justin Simmons not being there, potentially moving on from Garrett Bowles. What does that bode for this Broncos locker room moving forward? Because you're moving on from a lot of these widely respected players in terms of leaders that are willing to kind of set the standard for the locker room in total.
I've said this before and I'll say it again. Leadership in the locker room, it's a big deal, but it often gets overstated. It isn't hard to go out there and find guys through the draft, even though they take a little bit harder or a little bit longer to really step up into that leadership role, or find guys in free agency who can come in and take on that leadership role. It's not that difficult. We see it happen year after year, not just with the Broncos, but with the NFL as a whole. So Tim Patrick, keeping him, that's good for the leadership in the locker room. Justin Simmons, obviously that hurts a little bit. It hurt when we lost Kareem Jackson because he was a leader in the locker room. But the thing is that leadership in the locker room, leadership off the field isn't that point of that make or break point. If they're a leader, oh, we're gonna go after them, or they're not a leader, we're gonna stay away. It's not that breaking point, and that sometimes I'm not saying that you say this, but there are people out there around the team that talk about the team that kind of imply that's the case pretty often, and it's not. Um, so yeah, it's a big deal, but at the same time, it's not a super big deal that it sometimes can be made out to be.
Yeah, I find myself on a fine line there. Like the leadership definitely does matter to me, especially when you're going into what appears to be a full tear it down and rebuild. I mean, you're moving on from one of the best players for the Broncos over the last 10 seasons. And again, another guy, a guy that's widely
Well,
respected in the locker room, but also off the field too. I mean, Justin Simmons was incredible. And I'm going to grab Michael here in just a second. But what Tim Patrick brings to the community, or excuse me, Justin Simmons brings to to the community off of the field is something that is dramatically understated. This is a tremendous human being, and that was really a big blow not only to the Denver Broncos as a team, but the Denver community in total.
yeah, I think the real quick, Michael and coming in. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate
Thanks,
that.
Mike.
Good evening, Lance and Eric on the Dove Valley Deep Divers. Go Broncos. Thank you again, Michael, for joining us and being a constant supporter of not just the Dove Valley Deep Divers, but every show that we have on the Mile High Huddle Network. But as for if this is a full rebuild or not, and I know it's a tough conversation to have in a way, because with what the Broncos did last year in free agency, those big contracts that they handed out, doesn't really suggest that they were setting up for a rebuild, but then things didn't happen that they were expecting to. I think we'll get a better idea on if they're really looking into this as a full rebuild, tearing it all down, if they move on from Garrett Bowles, if they move on from Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy, if they move on from DJ Jones, and they can get out of his contract too, if they move on from Alex Singleton.
Yeah.
That's another name. Like, if they do all of that, then okay, I'll start believing that it's a full rebuild. Right now, I think what they're kind of doing is they're trying to build the offense by keeping a lot of the pieces that they have and kind of readjusting their build on the defense, moving on from the aging veteran of Justin Simmons, who was on the final year of his deal, and just kind of resetting the timeline with the defense a little bit, because a lot of their guys that are stepping up are younger guys on cheaper contracts and just trying to, build up the offense, go cheaper and younger on the defense.
Yeah, and I mean that makes a lot of sense. Younger, cheaper on the defense, and kind of see what Vance Joseph can do with some versatile players. I know that you are not necessarily a fan of what he did with guys like Isaiah Simmons or Zaven Collins with the Arizona Cardinals. We got a guy right now on this team that was playing off-ball linebacker, and Drew Sanders. It sounds like he's going to be moved to edge pretty much full time. So it's going to be interesting to see how the youth movement on this defense kind of affects the overall impact of that unit going forward and what it means for the Broncos in totality.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that if Vance Joseph is in charge of a defense and they draft a versatile player that can play multiple positions, that is a whiff of a pick. And I'm not trying to call Drew Sanders a bust right away, even though that's exactly how that's going to come across. The issue is when he transferred out of Alabama to Arkansas, one of the big reasons why he was moved to linebacker from being an edge rusher was because he didn't have the stature or the traits really to hold up as an edge rusher.
Yep.
That didn't change. He still doesn't. He still is short-limbed. He struggled last year playing off the edge. And in fact, his best play that we got last year was after he switched to edge and then was switched back because of some issues to playing linebacker. That's when we got the best play from him. And now they're back to putting him on the edge. He's a guy who had 1 year of college football playing linebacker. It was a position of he's got the athletic traits. He's got the athletic tools to be a linebacker. It was just developing the sense. And now they're just giving up completely all on that, which was the plan when they drafted him, to move him to a position that he was moved away from because he doesn't work there, because he doesn't fit. His play as an edge rusher last year for the Broncos was awful. It was awful. He was a liability out there. He got 2 pressures, I think, total, and both of those pressures came because of what somebody else was able to do and drive the quarterback to where he where he can easily, barely being blocked, and then can go chase the quarterback. It's kind of what it was. So it creates issues there. And I don't think that they are handling it the right way. And I don't think, when you look at his history, Vance Joseph has never handled these types of players very well. Hassan Reddick, he was trying to force him to be a linebacker, goes to edge, absolutely kills it. Zaven Collins, forcing him to be a linebacker, fails, goes to edge, works out. And mind you, both those guys had better traits that fit the edge position than Drew Sanders does.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah Simmons, trying to use him as a positionless player in defense.
The safety overhang that he tried to use him at was just so frustrating, man. Like you either need to keep him back off the ball and let him use that athleticism, or put him as a linebacker full time and just say, you know what, go and chase the football, man, because that was one of his best traits. That first step, click and close ability, the high end athleticism that he had, to just confuse his roles and to try to use him in a multiplicity kind of style was something that was never going to happen. Isaiah Simmons needed to have a clearly defined role, whether you define that as a safety or as a linebacker, as a pass rusher. If you wanted to use him that way, you could have done that. But to throw him in so many different ways and make him think and use his head in a way that he wasn't ready for, that was just a bad mix, man. It was a bad look for Vance Joseph. It made Isaiah Simmons expendable from that Arizona roster, and now he's currently a free agent, if I do remember correctly, which there's some connection there. Obviously, Vance Joseph, people are going to bring that up if you really look deep into the holes of the Twitter sphere. But I'm with you, man. It's hard to trust Vance Joseph to use those players that have that position versatility and find the correct role for them, because he doesn't seem to have an identified role for them when they come and get underneath his tutelage. Brian Ware jumping in here with the $5 super chat. What free agent quarterbacks do you expect Denver to look at? And would you guys be opposed to trading a third round pick to the Detroit Lions for Hendon Hooker? Eric, I'm going to pass this off to you, man.
Trading a third round pick for Hendon Hooker? No, he was a third round pick. As soon as he got drafted, his value dropped.
Yep.
Even without playing a snap, his value still dropped. He's a year older. And age was already a concern with him coming out, even though he should be healthy now. So no, I wouldn't trade a third round pick for him. I don't think Denver would explore that. If they're going to trade for somebody, I would keep an ear out for, someone like Sam Howell or Mac Jones. I think that in free agency, Sam Darnold is a name to watch. Jacoby Brissett is another one to keep an eye out for. And those are the two guys. I don't think they're really in play for Kirk Cousins. I think that's just kind of been it's every year we get these as like, oh, this team's going to be interested in said player because they have the need there. Denver has a need at quarterback. There's no doubt in that. There's just it'd be extremely difficult for them to work a contract out for Kirk Cousins because of the financial situation they're in as a result of giving that contract extension to Russell Wilson that they're now parting ways from, cutting him from without ever playing it down under that extension. So I don't think that they'll be able to work that out financially. Same thing with Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield's probably going to get 35 to 45 million on an average per year basis, probably from Tampa Bay is where I would expect. Maybe New England is able to get in there. And by all intents and purposes, it sounds like Kirk Cousins is going to be a Falcon. Wife from the area. She supposedly is ready to go back to her home. Apparently they supposedly have had a house there throughout their whole career and that they spent some time out during the off season as well. Just a lot linking him to Atlanta. So if he doesn't stick in Minnesota, and they have until the new league year starts because of how his contract voids to get a deal done. If he hits free agency, I would be surprised if he's not in Atlanta.
Well, and the Minnesota Vikings, if Kirk Cousins does actually hit free agency, I believe it's like $24 million in dead money from pushing down that contract. Yep.
With the void years. It's the void years on the contract and having that all come to due.
Yep. So if Kirk Cousins does actually end up in Atlanta, just quickly here, does that take him out of the quarterback conversation in the draft, or do you think that they would take a Kirk Cousins for a couple of years and maybe go get a guy like a JJ McCarthy, who has very raw potential and could potentially be a very good quarterback at the NFL level, but he's not ready to start right now. So if Kirk Cousins is there, does that take them out of that conversation, or do you think that makes more sense for them to then make a move to get McCarthy?
Because of his age, whoever does land Kirk Cousins, I don't think it necessarily takes them out of the quarterback market in the draft, but it makes it less likely they'll go there. Go build up the team around the quarterback, go all in on this quarterback, go all in on Kirk Cousins. And the Falcons, if they get Kirk Cousins, I would be looking at Dallas Turner or Terrion Arnold for them in the draft.
Okay.
Just because you got to build up that team and go all in on the quarterback. Maybe they end up taking a quarterback later on in the draft. just to like prep themselves, because Kirk Cousins, he is coming off an injury, he is older, just something to prep themselves for that possibility. But I'm not I'd say it's probably about a little over about 20%, I guess I would say, that they would take a quarterback with that first round pick.
That makes sense. I don't know. I like the idea of taking a Kirk Cousins and going out and getting a guy like McCarthy to let him grow for a couple of years while you still have the opportunity. You're paying Cousins, so you have a little bit of leeway in terms of the salary cap. Regardless, this isn't a Falcon show. If you guys want to listen to Falcon stock, Scott Kennedy's behind the scenes right now, and he will tell you everything about the Atlanta Falcons. He actually just walked away. I'm not sure if he walked away in disgust or what. But regardless, let's get back to the chat here. We got Phil McLaughlin jumping in here. Evening, Lance and Eric. Good evening, Phil. Thank you for joining us as per usual. Based on the players we have moved on from, do you think it is an indication we'll be trading back in order to get more picks? Hashtag Buckham with a B. Hashtag MHH for life. Hashtag Denver Broncos for life. I'm going to start this off because I currently firmly believe that the Denver Broncos are not picking at number 12 overall, regardless of what actually happens. Whether it is a move up for a guy like JJ McCarthy, or the current buzz is that Drake May is potentially falling and McCarthy could be selected over him. May could be a guy that slips down in the draft. The Broncos probably would like to go and get a guy like that, or they're going to be trading back from number 12 overall in order to get more picks. I know that it's like a non-committal statement, but I think the one thing that comes mostly out of my mouth that I think is firmly going to be the case, Denver's not picking at number 12 overall, Eric. What do you think?
Yeah, I would be surprised if they stay at 12 and make that pick there. I wouldn't say, it's not a 0% chance they don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
But it definitely seems a little bit unlikely right now. Either they'll move it up to go get one of those quarterbacks who potentially falls. Although from how things sound, it doesn't sound like one of them will fall past 7. Trades being factored in here. Okay. 7 is a popular place for the Titans to want to move down.
Mm-hmm. And go get that offensive lineman they need.
Or with the Saints, they've been linked to moving up. The Raiders, the Vikings, if they lose Cousins. I just don't think that Denver has enough ammunition to compete to trade up that far. Mm-hmm. And I think when it gets down to it, that they'll probably trade back, look at getting like a later first round pick and a second round pick out of the deal, and probably use that second round pick to go get a quarterback. And I would probably put, right now, it seems like Bo Nix would be that second round quarterback they want.
Yeah. And listen to Benjamin Albright, who is Broncos insider for KOA, the flagship of the Denver Broncos. He has been pretty much very transparent. I will say it like this, that Sam Darnold is probably going to be the quarterback, the veteran quarterback that the Broncos bring in to kind of bolster up that room. But he's also been kind of hinting at a little bit something that you had just spoken about, getting Bo Nix in here. One thing that he tweeted out a couple of days ago was, what would Broncos country think about going and getting Sam Darnold, trading back into the first round, back out of 12 in the first round, and selecting a guy like a Bo Nix? How would that ruffle your feathers, Eric?
I think that in 2 years you'd be looking at a quarterback again.
Okay.
I think Bo Nix can be fine as a quarterback. I think he can be, a decent enough starter in the right system, and I think that he can be a high quality backup. But when you look at the situation in the AFC West, having to compete with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, I do not think Bo Nix offers enough to consistently be able to compete with them, unless you get outstanding performances from your defense consistently. Mm-hmm. Which, with, again, what we were talking about, what I mentioned a little bit earlier, they seem to be kind of rebuilding that defense a little bit, moving on from Justin Simmons. That makes it harder for them to consistently compete with them, unless they find some outstanding gems that just come along super quickly.
Yeah.
So Bo Nix would be fine. Sam Darnold, I mean, it's whatever. Take a cheap shot there. I'm not expecting much out of him at this point in his career. So it's a whatever room that, in looking at a quarterback, and probably not 2025, which is fine because next year's class doesn't look great, but 2026.
Man, Quinn Ewers, Shedeur Sanders. I mean, there's some guys, Carson Beck, maybe a little bit, Riley
Leonard.
Leonard.
First round pick right now.
I understand that. I understand. It's just intriguing. I think Shedeur could get there. There's a long way to go for him for sure. He could definitely get there. He's got the tools to be there. He's just got to figure out how to process a hell of a lot faster and not take nearly as many sacks. We got Kathy Schmidldiddle, speaking of the quarterback, jumping in here across the pond. 2 euros, I believe that's what that is. Hi, Lance and Eric. I want a rookie quarterback that starts. So let's kind of transition this conversation a little bit away from what the Broncos have been recently doing. There's still some meat on that bone, and we'll get into that a little bit more here in a little bit. But let's talk about these quarterbacks at the combine, man. Erick has been doing some of the yeoman's work, like the most yeoman's work. He's been going through. He gave me the access to his top to his big board. 450 players graded right now. 450 guys. There's 253 or 265 players that get drafted on a yearly basis. Like he's already double over what's going on here. His big board has changed dramatically. We got Lawrence Rivera jumping in here. Nothing to say, just showing some love. But thank you, Lawrence. We appreciate you for joining us. Erick, you talked a little bit in an article about the combine, and the first guy that everybody has on their minds right now, specifically because he's the most linked quarterback to the Denver Broncos here of late, J.J. McCarthy, and his performance at the combine sounded to be and looked very, very, very good, man. He took a little bit of a jump in your top 100 big board, I believe 4 or 5 spots, something like that. What did he show you in Indianapolis, man?
It wasn't necessarily what he showed me. The actual workout was pretty much, what I was expecting. There were some misses on some of the throws, but a lot of times he was well placed with his passes and, pretty clean and consistent. Some wanted to show off his arm strength, and it's a good enough arm for the NFL. What moved him up for me was every person I talked to and has raved about the interviews for J.J. McCarthy. Smartest quarterback in this class, comments like that have been going about around him. Daniel Jeremiah, Dane Brugger, they've also mentioned, these kinds of comments about him. I'll be curious to see if he weighs in at the Michigan Pro Day, because everybody's making a big deal that he came in weighing about 215 pounds or so. I don't think he plays at that. I don't think he played at that last year. I think he definitely added some, water weight, drank a couple gallons of water before leading up to the weigh-in. And it'll be interesting to see. And it would, add in that water weight and then not do the athletic testing. It's pretty standard for guys who want to appear bigger, and they just don't weigh in at their pro days. So curious about that. But I think he's kind of settled himself. I think he's at my 19th overall prospect at the moment. I think that's probably where he's going to, settle in somewhere, right? 19, 20. And
yeah, I'm actually pulling up the rankings right now. Give me a second here.
I want to grab this comment real quick while you do that. Todd Ossendorf here. Erick has certain players he likes and others not. For example, I wanted Patrick Surtain, and Erick didn't believe he was a fit for the Broncos. Yeah, and I still stand by that. And we saw it last year. He was put in a more zone-heavy scheme, and he struggled. When he was able to play man, he did well. My issue was that Vic Fangio was drafting him to play in a very zone-heavy scheme, and something happened that I can't account for. Vic Fangio adjusted. He started playing half and half, basically. He's had Surtain in man coverage, where the rest of the defense, for the most part, was in zone coverage. And it's not that there's players that I like, players that I don't, but it's because of how I think they fit with the Broncos compared to other teams. And if I even think that they're just a good enough prospect or not. My issue with Patrick Surtain was never that he was a bad prospect. And I just want to be clear on that. I liked him as a prospect, just not for the Broncos. And that is something that I have gladly eaten crow on. He's gone on to be great. Even this last year when he was struggling in zone coverage, he was still one of the better corners in the NFL. So definitely one of the things that I missed on, one of my many misses. And I'll have many misses this year and over the next 5, 10, 15 years that I do this. It's just part of the game.
It's part of the evaluation process. It's a part of the evaluation process, guys. Like, people are going to form their own opinions. Erick and I are working on the Finding Broncos series right now, and we've kind of changed the format. Erick's working on 1 versus 1, player versus player, best fit for the Broncos, going through the top 100. I think 12 is what you have for the schedule for those articles. I'm doing a lot of work on the back end of the draft, guys, from the 150 to the 300 range this year. Like, there's a lot of players right now that excuse me, I disagree with Erick in terms of his big board rankings. I wish I could share it and show it to you guys. Erick's going to be the one to do that. But there's one player in particular, I'm going to drop his name here, Jordan McGee, the linebacker out of Temple. I have a 6-round grade on the guy. I didn't necessarily like his tape. I thought he was a little bit light in the loafers. He plays a lot stronger than what he was. Erick has him in his top 120. Like that's a big discrepancy. People are going to have their opinions on these players, and they're probably going to be wrong. More than likely, they're going to be wrong. In fact, you're talking about an 85% miss rate across the NFL level throughout the NFL draft for the majority of the draft's existence. I mean, it's never a perfect science. So just because Erick might have an opinion or I might have an opinion on a certain player doesn't mean that either one of us is right. We're just giving our evaluations. And I was with Erick on this one in terms of Pat Surtain. I didn't think that he was going to work in an off-zone coverage scheme, which is what Vic Fangio liked to do for the majority of his career. When he put Pat Surtain in press man and then played cover 6 on the backside, that was a completely different change from what Vic Fangio's ever shown in his time as a defensive coordinator. So you can identify players, you can identify the traits, you can highlight what they do well, what they don't do well, give your evaluation, and eventually you're probably going to hit on somebody and you're probably going to be wrong on someone. So not to come at you there, Todd, this is all in love. It's just a kind of a little bit behind the scenes in terms of how the scouting stuff goes, in what we do. Let's say hello to the rest of the chat really quick before we get going on, because I want to get to your top 100 big board here and the big changes. You had a lot of big changes that I'm very curious as to how your process changed and what your opinion is on this. But we've got Doug Tessier, string guy, Lawrence Riveria, obviously, Patrick Wiltsey coming in here from Hawaii, Kevin Gray as well, William James Baker jumping in here to say hello over on Facebook, Snoopy, Joe Mannix, Michael Davis, Michael Ronquillo, obviously, Sonny Staley, TW. Welcome in, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We got 300 pairs of eyes on us tonight. This is a huge show. So thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we can keep you guys entertained here for another, about half an hour or so. Now, Erick, obviously the big news of the day is the Broncos kind of changing some stuff up, but let's go back to your top 100 big board, man. Starting at the top here, you had a big change in terms of the offensive tackles here. Previously, going into your original top big board, you had Joe Alt as the second best player, the tackle out of Notre Dame. He dropped down to number 5, and then Talise Fuaga from Oregon State at number 12. He jumped up to number 7, dude. That's a big jump, going up inside the top 10 for a tackle that seemingly seems to be a right tackle only player at the NFL level. Is there a chance that Fuaga becomes offensive tackle number 1 in this class for you?
It would have to be something pretty extreme at this point. Grades are pretty much finalized. Pro days will cause some slight adjustment. Not a whole lot about it, unless, guy who didn't run goes and blows it away and doesn't match up with the tape. With Joe Alt, he dropped a little bit just because a couple guys went out there and moved up a little bit, which pushed him down. And then also I went back, and after watching his movement in the drills, I went back and watched him, and he's a little bit more stiff in the hips than I, first remember, which also played in that drop. Whereas with Fuaga, he moved up quite a bit. A couple guys that were ahead of him moved down, obviously, and that helped him move up. But the biggest thing for him was at the combine, I wanted to see how comfortable he looked working in a left side stance compared to a right side stance. And that is something that they do with the drills. And he looked like it would be no problem for him, working left side or right side. And to be clear here, he's my 8th overall prospect. He was, 12 or 13 like that beforehand. Even now, it is like less than 0.5 points that are separating those guys. They are all close together. And in fact, I think if I were to actually look at the numbers, I think he's actually tied right there with number 9 and number 7 with their overall grade. So it's all very close together.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part about building a big board. Last year, I did one of the first ones that I've ever done in terms of actually doing a grading scale for myself and building out a big board. It's so hard to differentiate how exactly you're going to finalize those grades, because you can come up with a player that has the exact same grade, whether it's a point decimal, like a decimal point off or whatever, but their positional value goes into that. How do you kind of separate the order out of that? So it's very subjective, I guess, is the best way to put that out there in terms of how your overall grades match up with my overall grades. People again have these different opinions, and you're going to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff a little bit, or the cream rises to the top, however you want to put that. So in terms of building a big board, that was just an interesting thing that I noticed, that you had alt falling that far and Fuaga rising up. They're very similarly graded, at least from what it looks like on your big board.
And I will say this too: is Alt only dropped not even like I think 0.2 points total from the combine
Mm-hmm.
showing, and going back and rewatching him. That's just how tight that group is for me.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, if you guys got any questions, please feel free to come in here, drop a super chat. Make sure we get to see those, and we'll get to as many questions as we possibly can. Super chats first, obviously, they take the big priority here. But if you have questions for us, questions for Erick in terms of his big board, I'm sure he's going to release an updated version of that here soon, probably in the next couple of weeks, I believe. Not to speak for Erick here, but I'm sure that's going to be coming back here around in just a little bit. But yes, any questions, guys, we're happy to answer all of those. Back to my particular questions here. You'll also have another offensive tackle here in Troy Fautanu out of Washington, moving up 8 spots from number 22 to 14. Dude, his workout at the combine is so technical. His feet were so clean. He played balanced. He was just incredible out there. What is his best fit at the NFL level, though? Because I know that there are people that are saying that he can play on the outside. Give him an opportunity at tackle. If he doesn't work out there, move him inside to guard. What do you think, man?
Yeah, biggest reason why he moved up so far is because he proved to me, especially when going back and watching tape again, combine's not the confirmation. It just, pushes me back towards the tape. Going back and watching some more of his tape, I came away thinking, all right, this is a guy, he can be a tackle in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
He's not going to be an interior offensive lineman only. He is a 5-position player, and that kind of versatility gives him a boost. And I would give him a shot at tackle before moving him inside. Or you could draft him to be a interior offensive lineman and just getting experience if you don't need a tackle right now, and move on, like the Broncos. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
might be looking for a little bit help inside. Uh, there's been some talk that Fautanu can play center. I don't think that will be the move they would make, but
Right.
maybe they just bring him along for that, because with tackle, I mean, Garrett Bowles, we don't know his status. Mike McGlinchey, with his restructure, he's likely in Denver through 2026 now because of
Wow.
the restructure for his deal and how that money aligns. Um, he's guaranteed at least through 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2026, because the dead money, and it's probably going to be a situation where they're going to look at restructuring him again next year.
Mm-hmm.
Just creating some of those issues, and he also has a void year added to his contract. Um, so it just it's Troy Fautanu with the Mike McGlinchey restructure and all that. He is a guy that I'd be looking at moving inside, seeing what he can do there, which is it's always an option. Though I think he's going to go to a team that really needs a tackle, and they're going to play him at tackle and see if he can't succeed there, and if he can't, then move him inside.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, man. When you have those versatile players, it's so hard. Again, going back to your draft evaluations and trying to build your big board, versatility is something that I value incredibly when it comes to like similarly graded players. Moving guys around, especially on the offensive line and in the secondary, the more you can do, the more valuable you are. So that's probably going to give you a little bit of boost in terms of my grading. Erick, I'm not sure if that kind of boosts your grades or anything like that. I'm sure that it does, but a guy, a 5-tool player, essentially, like you said, can play left or right side, inside, outside, center versatility as well. That's got to be a big one, along with a guy like Graham Barton coming out of Duke. I mean, you're talking left side, right side versatility, inside, outside versatility, can play that center position. How did he perform at the combine? If he did, I didn't get to watch the offensive line drills. And where does he stand on your board right now? Graham Barton, that
Sorry,
is.
what player was that?
Graham Barton, the
Barton.
offensive line from Duke.
All right, he is a guy that I think, while Fautanu confirmed that he could play tackle for me, I think Barton, it's still a situation of, Can he play tackle? I don't think he can with where he came in with his measurements. Obviously, tackles, they still have, there is a minimum length requirement that's needed there. Wingspan is big for him. He just kind of failed to meet those standards. I think that has a chance to come in and be a starting center right away, even though he is making a huge adjustment for it. There has been nothing but praise for him. He practiced there at times for Duke. If I remember right, he even played there for a little bit at Duke. He played multiple positions on the offensive line. Great versatility, can play any of the 3 interior offensive line spots. So when I look at teams that could use him, there are teams there in that, about, what is it, like 17 or 18, I think, up through the, first 10 or so of the second round. He's got a good range to go in, and he is one. I wouldn't be surprised if, even though I have Jackson Powers Johnson as my top center, and I think my number 9 overall prospect, it wouldn't surprise me if Barton does end up hearing his name called before him.
Yeah, you do have Jackson Powers Johnson at number 9 overall. I want to stick with the center position here because you had a guy. I got to pull up the different article here. Excuse me for that. Where is it at? Oh, Zach Frazier. You had at number 32 overall on your big board. He dropped all the way down into the 50s. We're talking a powerful player. He's a good mover. He plays with leverage really well. But at the combine, I thought he played well from what or at least performed well at the combine. What happened there? Why did the drop down from 32 down into, I think, 53 overall on your board?
Sorry.
Zach Frazier.
Zach Frazier. Okay.
We're moving fast, guys. I got to apologize on this one. I'm going back and forth and bouncing around. So give me a second to slow it down. But
the apologies are on my end. An important message came through that I had to respond to real quick. That took my attention there for a second. But Zach Frazier, it really isn't anything he did that caused him to fall. I mean, the fact that he was out there working out, doing the drills at the combine after breaking his leg November 25th or 26th, man, that's just a phenomenal recovery. There's no doubt that he has the toughness that you want for it. To me, it's issue of versatility. Versatility both in scheme and where you can play do have a big impact on my grades overall. I don't think he is super position versatile. I do think he is more of a center only type prospect, and a very scheme specific center only prospect, which just factoring that in with what some of the other guys did, he dropped a little bit. He dropped, I think it was about 1.5 points total, which again, I talked about it earlier, how tight these grades are. That's enough to make that big of a drop.
Right. Well, we got TW jumping in here saying, Zach Frazier, you're a Bronco. Does he fit Sean Payton's scheme?
Oh, yeah. That is definitely, this is definitely one of the schemes where I think that he can come in, start day one, and be effective and hold the fort.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, man. When I first watched this tape, it was actually on Twitter. I think it was Dane Brugler or Brandon Thorne, 2 guys that are definitely very, very good at evaluating offensive line talent. I think it was Brandon Thorne that actually was the one that shared it out. 4-time state champion wrestler. This dude plays with leverage like you can't believe. He understands hand placement. He understands how to work his hips and his knees through his upper body, and then press people away from his torso. And he can drive pretty much anyone away from his body and just move them backwards. It's so phenomenal to watch him work playing that center position. And he's smart too, from what I understand. He's very high IQ kind of a football player. I think that the big thing, and Eric, this is something that you can kind of elaborate on a little bit more, movement, side-to-side lateral agility is something that he is probably not best suited for, which limits him to a power scheme only.
Yeah, and that's the big thing is lateral agility. That is kind of the thing you look for. Can they fit in an outside zone scheme, or are they more of a power scheme? But that's the basic aspect. Obviously, power has to factor in. And they don't always coincide together. Just because somebody's powerful doesn't mean they can't move. They don't have that lateral agility, lateral mobility. So yeah, the movement skills aren't exactly what you look for that outside zone wide scheme that you typically look for. There are some technical issues as well. So when you're in an outside zone or wide zone or whatever you want to call it scheme, one of the big things is you're looking for really good technique, because you can use your technique to cover up for your lack of power, because more often than not, if you're in that kind of scheme, you don't have a lot of power to just, straight up on a defender.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're looking for that technique, and there are technical lapses with the handwork and with the footwork that can lead to some issues with that. Whereas when you put him head on a defender in an inside zone or a gap power scheme, that he can sit there and head on and just use his raw strength to sit there and just win and beat defenders down.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100% on that. It's a really good breakdown. And one thing that I also want to point out is movement skills in your lower half, the lateral agility, being able to outrun somebody to a landmark. That's the big thing with outside and wide zone schemes, is getting to a certain spot onto the field and being prepared to either take on a defender or then move up to the next spot, your next landmark, to go and dig out another defender at the second level. Wide zone is definitely one of the more athletically challenging running schemes that you can get at the NFL level. Phil McLaughlin jumping in here. Some stars over on Facebook, as he is wont to do. Thanks again, Phil, for joining us. We appreciate you, buddy. As of today, where besides quarterback, what position do you rank as the most important? Eric, you and I have talked about it multiple different times. Interior defensive line. This is the one that seemingly has been the topic of discussion. I know currently the Broncos are out there not necessarily negotiating, but at least reaching out to people in terms of trying to bring in interior defensive linemen to help this defense, which is one of the worst run defenses and one of the worst pressure defenses at the NFL level last season. I'm going to go to the NFL draft here. You have a guy that ran up 6 spots from number 21 to number 15, the clear-cut interior defensive lineman, number 1, Byron Murphy out of Texas. If Denver doesn't go with quarterback at number 12, whether it's any other position, offensive tackle, cornerback, tight end, you get Brock Bowers in there. Regardless, is Byron Murphy a player that's worth the 12th overall pick to you? And how does he upgrade this interior defensive line for the Broncos if that were to be the selection?
So there's a lot hitting him for his run defense. I don't think it's that big of an issue. He's talked about it. He talked about it at the combine, and we talked about it last week. The knee down technique where he drops to a knee, uses that to help himself get leverage and generate more power to toss blockers. And then he has the explosion, and it showed it at the combine, to explode back up off his knee and, get after the quarterback, get after the ball carrier. He's got other techniques that do help him against the run as well. I would still say it's not his strongest suit, but it's not as big of a concern as other people have.
Right.
But I mean, his ability to get after the quarterback, how quickly he get after the quarterback. Then he goes to the combine, does the drills, and he looked like he was a 250-pound edge rusher doing some of those drills. The movement skills are great. He's got some really clean footwork. He's just everything that you want from an interior defensive lineman to try to make an impact, especially as a pass rusher right away. It's all there. And defensive line is a position that typically takes 2 to 3 years to come, for them to come around. But Murphy, again, there's enough there with Murphy that he can have an impact as a rookie and be one of those defensive linemen a year from now that we're talking about how quickly he was able to make an impact with just the traits, the athleticism, his journey to being a defensive lineman where he started as a running back. It's cool story, and he still shows that same kind of explosiveness that he showed when you go back, and it was only a highlight reel that I was able to watch, but I managed to find some tape of him being a running back all those years ago. And it's still same kind of explosiveness there.
That's fun. I didn't know that he was a running back in high school. That's a brilliant piece of information. Thank you for bringing that to us. Quickly though, just quickly on this, Vance Joseph's scheme. Single gap, let's penetrate, let's try to get in there, let the linebackers flow. Is that a good fit for him in terms of his run defense at the NFL level?
The gap and a half is a good fit for him. You don't want him two gapping, obviously, and you don't really two gap in Vance Joseph's scheme unless you're the nose, or unless it's an obvious rundown situation. But he can two gap. I mean, the knee drop technique specifically is designed and created to help you against double teams, to help it so you're not getting driven back. And it's becoming more and more prominent in the NFL each passing year. So he has the techniques to hold up against a double team, to two gap if need be, and the explosiveness to, shoot a gap in single gap systems, which are kind of fading a little bit, or the toughness and the strength to hold up as a gap and a half to make that quick read and then shoot the appropriate gap for the ball carrier. He's got that as well. So I don't think that in terms of the gaps with the defensive line, I don't think that's a big part of his evaluation to be concerned about.
That's a good point, man. And also quality analysis, man. Like this is why I love working with you. You do such a great job in terms of bringing the quality analysis and making it easy for everybody to learn. Big brain. Is the oxygen level in Kenai is it starting to kind of decrease a little bit as your head is growing to exponential sizes? I mean, you already got a watermelon dome, but your ego's got to be kind of inflating at least a little bit here.
No, I mean, it's always nice when people, even close friends, say nice things about the work that you do. Mm-hmm. But I always go and I talk to my wife about this pretty regularly. Is I don't think I'm as good as other people think I am, even though I like to act like I am. But it's also a lot of time, reflecting on myself with how I go about things, how I evaluate, how I change my evaluations and what matters. It's a never ending process to grow and be better at doing what I do.
Yeah. The big thing is I just appreciate the work that you do and you helping me out. Like I send you all of my scouting reports. You give me the feedback and stuff like that. It's always fun to work with a guy with as much experience as you. And I respect you, dude. You're one of the best draft analysts that I know. It shows your work is always constantly up there at the top, and you put so much work in. So we always have to shout you out, at least here on Dove Valley Deep Divers, in terms of what you do. And I appreciate what you do. Let's go back to the top 100 here. A couple of big things. We talked a lot about him last week on the show. Braden Fisk, the interior defensive lineman from Florida State. 3 to 5 technique guy, the explosive pass rusher, can get after the quarterback, and he tested out of this world. We're talking way above expectations, and his on the field drills, despite slipping all over the place, he was still one of the best interior defensive linemen at the combine. He had a massive jump for you in your rankings. 75 overall a couple of weeks ago on your big board when we broke that down, all the way up to number 32. He doubled his draft stock. Well, I say that, but at the same time, it's not really true. 75 to 32, dude. That's a huge game, man. Break it down.
So one of the biggest things is that there were some medical concerns coming about him. There was an issue with I believe in one of his knees or his hip. I can't remember exactly which, that teams were concerned about. And, that was flagged during the season by FSU medical staff. I don't think he missed any games from it, but it was a concern that they were. So I was, medicals are something that I'm a little cautious with. So I had him down a little bit. Well, medicals happen, and one of the first things I get is it's all clean, basically. Get a text. Yeah. There's no concerns about it. There's no longevity concerns, anything like that. That right there was a big boost to him. And then when I went and watched him originally, I didn't quite see the same explosiveness that he showed at the combine. And even at the Senior Bowl, I didn't quite see that same level of explosiveness on his game tape. So what did I do? I went back and watched some more games of his. I think I watched every single FSU game that he played in this last year, and even went back and watched some of his Western Michigan tape, I think, from last year or from 2022. Yep. And yeah, that explosiveness is there. I don't know if I just missed it. I don't know what the case was. Maybe I was underselling it. But that explosiveness there is clear on tape. And yeah, I mean, it's just exceptional. Puts him in a good spot to win the rep almost immediately. He can take that outside shoulder of a guard and has enough strength and leverage to drive it through it and get to the quarterback quickly. He's got some good counters developed in him to, he can set up the outside and counter inside. There is a lot there as a pass rusher, and he is pretty sound as a run defender as well.
Yeah. My biggest thing is his jarring impact, man. Like, he's explosive in his lower half, but when he gets his hand on you, he jars offensive linemen. He has power in that lower half, converting it to his upper half. It's a lot of fun to watch him, man. And there's some twitch there too. He's got some bend, a little bit of twitch. He can move side to side a little bit. He's a fun player to watch. We got RD jumping in here. This is a new name for us. So first and foremost, thank you for joining us. Welcome in to Dove Valley Deep Divers. Hopefully you enjoy what we were bringing you to on this wonderful Friday evening, and stick around. Hopefully we can continue to impress you and entertain you. Up in Canada, north of the 49th parallel. If we trade back, he says, with a $5 super chat, what's better for a rebuild, a late first and second this year, or a late first this year and a first next year? Eric, I think this is pretty obvious. If you can get 2 first-round picks, you got to take the 2 first-round picks. Like, plain and simple. This team has been devoid of talent for a long time. They've traded 3 first-round picks over the last 3 seasons. Obviously, 2 to get Russell Wilson, 1 to get Sean Payton, that they actually acquired for Bradley Chubb a couple of years ago. You need that talent, the top tier talent, the first-round picks. You need that on this roster, man. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I really question the value of future picks going forward with the NIL and a lot of the changes that are happening in the college world. Just as we saw evaluation of picks change when the rookie contracts came out. So I would love to get 2 first-round picks, but I question if that value will be there, especially with, the early look of how next year's class is projected to be. That's always been a factor of future pick value, the value of future picks. So it's definitely tough, but if you can get those 2 first-round picks, you take those 2 first-round picks.
Yeah. You said something interesting in terms of NIL and obviously the rookie wage scale and stuff like that, getting value back in terms of future picks. This is the last year, I do believe, of the COVID year, the year where everybody got that COVID exemption. They got an extra year of eligibility. How does that change things moving forward now? You're not getting 5th-year seniors, 6th-year seniors, guys that are that use that redshirt year to kind of boost the overall impact of these draft classes that we've seen over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, so that is kind of, everybody was expecting a big change for that, a lot more players coming out earlier. Well, now NIL is a big thing, and they're starting to figure that out. And we're seeing it this year. And I was talking to one guy because of all the players that I have with a draft grade in it. I only have like 285 players with an actual draftable grade. It peaks in the 4th round. And I think I 7th round grades than I do 1st round grades. And so I was curious about that. Like if I'm off or something. So I reached out to a couple people I know about it, and they're saying no, that's the NIL in effect. These guys that are, these viewed as 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th rounders are taking NIL money, staying in school, and trying to build up on their draft stock for the next season. And that's kind of what I think we're going to be seeing more and more of, is the depth of these drafts are going to get hit a little bit as teams can earn more money by staying in school and still and then get a potentially bigger rookie contract by helping themselves with another good year, maybe staying healthy or whatever the case may be, transferring to a new school and just putting together a new year and getting drafted earlier than they were expected to.
Yeah. Man, that makes a lot of sense. And so again, it's difficult to come in from every single angle in terms of how to evaluate this stuff. You never know. You're trying to look forward to a future draft class, trying to identify guys, and you never know if that guy's actually going to declare, because there's some big time money out there in college football anymore. I mean, whether it's through the NIL or the collective, so the collective meaning the boosters and stuff donating money to the school to help pay these players, whether it's at $50,000 or whatever the hell they're making anymore. The NIL is definitely affecting the NFL draft landscape. And there was a conversation there for a little bit about Caleb Williams, who was making, I think, $5.5 million to play at USC this last season. I mean, Shedeur Sanders is making $3 or $4 million to play at Colorado. So that's an interesting way of going about the conversation. And I think that the more that we learn about it and the more that we understand, it's going to change the way that people evaluate these draft prospects moving forward as a whole, especially scouting out into the future. So that's a good point. I think you bring a salient point there, and I appreciate that. Lawrence Rivera jumping in here, asking who is the best blocking tight end in this class. And Eric, I've got a name for you. I didn't see his name on your top 100. That I wasn't necessarily looking for him. But a player that I liked a lot coming out of Illinois, before the whole birds aren't real thing. Tip Ryman, man. You want to talk about your prototypical wide tight end with receiving ability and elite athleticism? Tip Ryman, dude, he's a hell of a blocking tight end, man. What do you think? Is he the best blocker outside of Brock Bowers? Is he the best blocking tight end in this class?
He's definitely up there. I would say if he's not the best, he's probably in the top 3 blocking tight ends for this year.
He was so fun to watch, dude. You don't necessarily see the athleticism translate to his tape, at least from the games that I got to watch, but you can tell that there's some juice there. Like he's a fun player to watch. David Youngkin jumping in here with a $5 super chat. Some people say build the team first and then go get the quarterback. The first thing you do is get the quarterback first and then build around him. All right, man. This comes into one of those more philosophical debates that we like to have here on Dove Valley Deep Divers in terms of, does the pass rush matter more than your coverage on the back end of the secondary? Does your offensive line do nearly as much for your quarterback in terms of getting the ball out on time? Or is your quarterback holding on to the football and not seeing things the right way? It's a philosophical approach. Which would you prefer here, though? Especially considering this Denver Broncos team, because you and I have already broke it down. There's a lot of holes coming up. You can point to holes at every single position on this roster. Do you need the quarterback right now, or do you need to build the roster first and then plug the quarterback in?
So I think you hit the nail on the head. Everybody's going to have a different take on this. And
that's
for the same team
tonight, apparently.
For the same team in a matter of 3 years, it can go from being one way to the other. It all depends on the way the roster looks. The way Denver looks right now, in my opinion, they wait on quarterback. They build up the team around them. Yep. They get younger. They get cheaper. They get out of this bad Russell Wilson dead cap hit and, start getting that draft capital built up a little bit, those draft picks built up a little bit. Try to get some compensatory picks as well. Stop trading players for trading future picks for the now. Build that up a little bit, put yourself in a position where you can go after and get one of the top quarterbacks. Build the nest, then go that way. And then real quick, I want to talk about this since it's been a big topic of conversation. But first, Michael Ronquillo. Great show tonight, Lance and Eric on the Dove Valley Deep Divers.
Thanks, Mike.
Broncos. Thank you again, Mike. We appreciate that. Now, the topic of conversation, quarterbacks and arm strength. And this is always a terrible conversation that I hate having year after year. I think it was Jeremy who said that a bunch of quarterbacks didn't have Joe Milton's arm strength. The number of quarterbacks that had the arm strength Joe Milton has, I could probably count on one hand.
Josh
especially
Allen.
In recent. There are not many. So when you're talking about Bo Nix and you're going to be comparing him to Joe Milton, that's a no-go. They are definitely on completely different tiers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, arm strength isn't everything. Arm strength isn't what will make or break Bo Nix's draft stock. It's not going to make or break any quarterback's draft stock. However, while Bo Nix has a good enough arm for the NFL, good enough, he can make those deep throws. When you watch him with those deep throws, you watch the amount of effort he has to put into making those throws. It is more than others. He is not a quarterback that can be in a scheme that will consistently take those shots.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, there are concerns with him making those tight window throws because he struggles to put consistent velocity on those throws. Mm-hmm. The nose of the ball will drop, and he showed this a lot at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine, as well as many times in games. The nose of the ball will drop a little bit, and it'll make life a little bit more difficult for the receivers. Fortunately, the receivers that he had and the offense he was in made life a little bit easier by scheming guys open so much. Bo Nix doesn't have a great throw or doesn't have a great arm by any means, but it isn't a terrible one either.
Right.
It is there. It is in that good enough range, which you can work with and, you can work around, but there are concerns with it. And if you are not willing to accept that he does not have a great arm, that there are issues with it, that the extra windup is needed, the extra hitch in his step, that all these things aren't needed for him, well, then I don't know what to tell you, because every single evaluator out there, both from the level that I do this to the best of Dane Brugler, Daniel Jeremiah, Lance Zierlein, all these guys have talked about it. Jeremy, you and I aren't far off. You say B plus. I think he's got a B on.
Yep.
B,
I'm right there. I'm right there with you. And quite honestly, let's talk about Tua Tagovailoa here for a minute, because he's a B plus level arm at the NFL level. He doesn't possess the necessary zip to force balls into tight windows. He's not going to throw the ball 60 yards in the air downhill. But here's where he is effective. Tua Tagovailoa plays with timing, anticipation, and accuracy. He understands the limitations in his arm strength. He knows that he can't force tight window throws, so he has to process information very rapidly and get the ball out of his hand accurately, on time, and within rhythm. If you watch Bo Nix play, and I'm not a huge Bo Nix fan by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I don't want the Broncos to draft him in the top 50. I really don't. However, that being said, when you watch him at Oregon, he does play very well with timing. He gets the ball out of his hands quickly. He understands that he has to hit a precise window that's the size of essentially a poster board in this particular time frame. He has to get the ball out, and he works with that. I think that's a big part, not only the offense at Oregon, but I think that's a big part of the reason why you saw him throw a lot of footballs less than 10 yards down the field. He didn't work the middle of the field from 10 to 20 yards nearly as effectively as some of these other quarterbacks in the NFL draft. He's not a guy like Michael Penix that's going to work on the boundary, working to big body receivers and pushing the football down the field. Again, going to what Bo Nix is capable of doing, he makes a lot of sense for what Sean Payton likes to run. A lot of in-breaking routes, get the ball out of your hand, throw over the middle of the field. It makes a lot of sense for that particular fit. I don't know that I'm willing to accept Bo Nix as a Broncos quarterback right now, because I don't think that he's a game changer at the position. But if that's the direction that Sean Payton is willing to go in, at least at this particular point, I think I might be willing to accept that, given multiple different terms. Trading down, hopefully falls to you, or get some extra cap, whatever you got to do. You take him at 12, you take him in the first round. That's a bad idea to me. If you can wait for him to get to you, then fine, I'm okay with it.
And the final point before we get out of here, because we went a little bit long on arm strength, it isn't about how deep you can throw it. That
Velocity.
isn't true measurement of arm strength. It's not even velocity. It's those 20-yard outs to the opposite hash.
Mm-hmm.
How quickly can you get the ball there? That's where velocity comes in. Those are the throws that really test the arm strength. And there are hardly any of those in Bo Nix's tape. There are a lot of, to be fair, there are very few of those on most college quarterbacks tape, which is always why you got to use all these other measurements to try to figure that. So that is what that is the true test of arm strength. Can they get the ball there on time? Josh Allen, he did a lot of that in college, and that's why there was never any doubt about his arm strength. That is something that Anthony Richardson has done, or did quite a bit in college as well. So it's not just about how far you can throw it. Exactly. It's not just about how hard you can throw it. It is a combination of these things, and the true test of that are those 20-yard outs to the opposite hash.
Yeah, I can throw a football 50 yards. I'm 32 years old, 5'11", 160 pounds. I can throw a football 50 yards. Can I throw it there on a frozen rope and put it there with timing and touch? No, not a chance. I need to get a crow hop and throw all my body into it. Does that count that I have a strong arm? I can throw it 50 yards? No, not a chance. David Young can jump in here. $5 super chat. Let's round this out here in just a few minutes here. Again, David, multiple times here on the show, dropping some great appreciation and some great love here for the show. Problem with regardless. Problem with the bridge quarterback is you still are continuing to look for that answer. Quite honestly, you're still continuing to look for that answer, and the Broncos have a lot of those questions to answer right now. Is it going to be a Sam Darnold, a Gardner Minshew, Drew Lock? Can we stop that now? How they find that quarterback that can be the game changer for this team. There's a lot of ways to go about that right now. And Eric, I think you and I are kind of in lockstep here. Building this roster is more important right now than finding a quarterback and putting him in a bad situation, because it's one of the reasons why I think the Broncos need to keep Garrett Bowles. extend him, keep him around. If you are going to go and try to find a young quarterback, you need to put him in the best situations to succeed. And throwing a backup level tackle out there, because you're probably not getting a quarterback at 12 if you do go that route, or even a Spencer Rattler. If you're taking a Marius Mims, you've got, or JC Latham, whoever it may be, to step in there as a rookie left tackle that you have to now pick because you moved on from a quality left tackle. Puts the team in a bad situation, puts a quarterback in a bad situation to grow and learn. And I'm with you, dude. I think that we need to build this roster as a whole from top to bottom, man. And yeah, trading back is my preferred option right now.
Yeah, that's gonna have to do it for us. Yeah, we gotta get out of here. We went a little bit long. Thank you guys for joining us. We will be back next week, and next week there will be some free agency stuff to talk about. I don't expect the Broncos to be super active, real quick, but I do think that they'll make a couple signings. I would be keeping eyes on guys on the defensive line, and we'll definitely get better idea of where they are at, or what their ideas are or plans are for this offseason, probably here in the next couple days. Ben Powers, Zach Allen, do they get restructured? Alex Singleton, what happens with him? Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, DJ Jones. Those are all the names to watch to help you get an idea of what the Broncos are going to be doing going forward. But for now, we've had some news. Quinn Bailey's back. Tim Patrick's back. Tim Patrick on a renegotiated deal, taking a significant pay cut. The Broncos sit with about just under $18.4 million against the salary cap. And with the compensatory picks were released today, so we know exactly what picks the Broncos have at the moment. So a lot of news. We'll be back next week, and there'll be a lot more news to come. Thank you guys for joining us. Have a wonderful night, and have a wonderful weekend.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. We'll want to say some quick shout outs here. David Cromwell, Michael Ronquillo, Brian Ware, Phil McLaughlin, Kathy, RD, Lawrence Rivera, David Yunkin, a couple of different times. Thank you for showing some gracious support here on the show on Dove Valley Deep Divers on a wonderful Friday evening. You all stay safe and take care. For Erick Trickel, I am Lance Sanderson. We will see you guys same time, same place next week.